Okay, so I've just finished walking my dog, doing everything that I needed to do, so I just wanted to get straight in with what I read this year so far. I was originally planning to do what I read in a month, but I have only been reading one series this month, so I thought that would be a little too boring. So just a disclaimer, all of these are YA fantasy novels, as I'm currently planning my own YA fantasy novel, and I'm going to try and not say any spoilers. I'm just going to give like a brief overview, but if there is any spoilers, I do apologise. So first of all, I'm going to start with what I read at the start of this year, which was Vow of Thieves by Mary E. Pearson. This coincides with the Vow of Thieves novel, and I think this is a really great series overall. I believe there is other books in this series that do kind of link to the world and the timeline of these novels, but I haven't read those. I believe they were set before. So just for focusing on Vow of Thieves, I rated this a 4.5 stars out of 5. I really love this book. It was like one of my favourites I've ever read, to be honest. So just a brief overview. We're following, this is split point of view, so we're following Kazi, who I would say is more of the protagonist, and then Jace, who ends up being the love interest. So for Kazi, she's a street thief turned the Queen's premier guard, and basically she's trying to prove herself and prove that she's loyal to the Queen. So she goes after Jace, who is a king. He's just become the king. So basically his dad passed away and he's just become the king, but his kingdom is not really announced a kingdom, and he's kind of, you know, upset about that, because to him and his family, they believe they were the first nation. So he's basically been brought up in a lot of confusion with the Queen, and they believe he's done things that he hasn't done, some things he has done, but Kazi has come to take him. I think one of the best things about this novel is that it begins with a close proximity trope, and I think this is a really great way to also bring in the enemies to lovers trope. So they begin, you know, she's trying to take him, he's trying to escape. Things happen that, again, I won't say because of spoilers, but they end up chained together by the foot. And I think that's a really great way to start this story, because, you know, they're forced to be together, they're forced to get along and to work together to survive and to get back to Jace's kingdom, which I think is a really great plus to this book, just to bring their relationship to the forefront. Also, another thing I wanted to mention is that these have really unique voices. So for me personally, and anyone else who is wanting to write novels, I really recommend this novel and this series as a whole, because Jace and Kazi and just overall every character has such a unique voice. Also, with these both combined, I would say the spice level of these books is very low, which for some people might be a con, but for me, I don't really like the spice in most novels. I think a lot of novels tend to overdo it, and I think what is good about this one is that it builds up the tension. They still have the tension there for the romance, but it implies that, you know, these like sexual acts are happening, but it doesn't go into too much detail, which I really like, because I feel like a lot of the time the sex scenes in novels take away from the plot, which I think this does really well not to do that, because overall there's a lot of plot twists in this novel that I really like. So yeah, I would say that is my main pluses for this novel. As for Vow of Thieves, now this is a spoiler, so please click away if you don't want to hear this, but Jace basically ends up, Kazi believes he's dead, but he's not dead. And I really like that about this novel, because it shows, you know, Kazi's protective nature, and overall I think Jace and Kazi have a very protective nature over one another, which is another thing I really like, is that, you know, with her being a female protagonist, she is not at all timid and afraid to do things. She, you know, is very open about standing up for herself and standing up for Jace and the people she cares about, which I really like. But yeah, so basically Jace is presumed dead by Kazi and a lot of the kingdom, and what has happened is Jace's kingdom has been overruled by another king, and we're following Kazi as she's like kidnapped, basically locked in a cell. And I think that's a really good also point to this novel, that we get this new aspect of Kazi, and we get a little bit more into her backstory as, like, you know, thief and things, which I really like. And I won't go into too much detail about the ending, but I would say overall these two novels as a whole are really strong, and I would say if you are planning on writing your own novel or just enjoying a fantasy novel, this is one of my favourite fantasy novels to date. Now, after reading The Dance of Thieves and The Vow of Thieves, I immediately started to read The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. This was recommended to me by my sister. When I first read the first chapter, I was a little skeptical because the first chapter is based in the mortal world and this is another YA fantasy, so I was a little confused, a little concerned about how it was going, but I think I did not like the mortal world, going back and forth from the mortal world so much at first, but now after reading the full series I actually think it was a really good strong point for the novel. So I rated this one 4 stars for The Cruel Prince. I think as I went through the series I went up in the rating. So again, just a brief overview. So we're following the protagonist Jude. I believe she is 17 and she is a mortal girl living in the Fae world. So her father and her mother died and she is taken by Maddock, who is like a war general and is her half-sister. It's her father. So she's brought into the Fae world and I think she really struggles with fitting in, as you would. She's bullied quite a lot by Carden, who I really hated at first, but if anyone's read it you'll know that Carden ends up being the love interest, which I found really hard to believe at first because I did hate Carden. But yeah, basically she's being bullied by a lot of people, not fitting in. She also has a twin sister and they're both basically bullied too because they're in the same school as these Fae children. They basically don't believe they have the right to be there, and basically she has a lot of anger inside and she wants to, you know, prove herself. So she sets off wanting to become a knight, but basically with a few turn of events she ends up becoming a spy and working with the Court of Shadows, which is what basically brings us through the plot. So again, for this book and for all of the series there is no spice at all, which again I really like. I'd say there was a little bit of it, maybe a little beginning of some spice in a few moments, but really not over the top at all, which again I think helps focus the plot, which I really liked. And this is also enemies to lovers. As I said, I hate Carden at the beginning. So basically Carden is this bully who is known for ripping fairies' wings off and doing all these sorts of like torturous stuff just for fun, and he's laughing about it and things. And really, I said to my sister at the beginning, I was like, I know he ends up being the love interest, but I just don't see how he can. And I think again that is another thing Holly Black does really well. So with him starting off as, you know, someone who's hated by Jude and someone who's meant to be hated by us and rightfully was, I think she does it really well, showing little hints of his backstory that help us see, you know, maybe everything isn't all as it seems. And again, I love the unique voices from this, and I did just want to mention this is, I don't think it's mentioned in this one, but it's mentioned in the series as a whole. Carden is not a fighter, which I think is something that a lot of books don't do. You know, the male is considered the fighter, and a lot of the time the female too. But I've never read a book that has the male be complete opposite of a fighter, which I really like about this novel. So basically, just to give a brief overview of the series as a whole, Jude ends up becoming the one in the relationship that does the fighting and protects the kingdom, and Carden is more of the one who is against killing and just kind of wants to handle everything in a peaceful way, which I think is very refreshing. Okay, so for the next books in the series, I rated them all a 4.5 stars. So we have The Wicked King next. Again, there is going to be spoilers in this, inevitably. So basically, Jude has a brother called Oak, a younger brother, and he is intended to be the king by Maddock, who is Jude's father. And, you know, Jude growing up in the Fae world is like, no, that's like unacceptable to put such a young kid as the king. Like, it would not work. So basically she devises a plan to get Urk back into the mortal world and living with his sister, and instead she puts Carden on the front, which is also unknown to Carden. And I loved that plot twist. When I read that, I just, you know, gasped, because I was like, what? You just don't expect it at all. I think that's a good thing about the plot twist, is that it is completely a secret. You just have no hint of it until it's happened. And that is how this book ends, which I really love. And obviously for the next one, with the Queen of Nothing, this starts with Carden being king. And quick summary, 4.5 stars as well. Jude becomes the queen. Carden says he'll marry her, and then she becomes the queen, and then he exiles her. But the way he words it is very sneaky. He words it like saying that the only way she can come back is basically if someone royal, you know, him, agrees that she can come back. So she leaves and is all upset, but basically she could bring herself back, but she didn't. And again, I really like that about that book, this book as a whole, this whole series, is that everything always has a twisted meaning. Again, with Fae, they can't lie, so a lot of the times they will twist their words, you know, so you can find a loophole, which is what this book does really well. Okay, next, perhaps a controversial opinion, perhaps not. How the King of Elfhame Learned to Hate Stories. Now, I would say that this is a really great book, but I'm not sure it's needed. I think I gave it 3 stars. The art in it is really well drawn. I think it's a really good collector's item for the series if you're like really enjoying the series. But I would say if you're debating on whether or not to buy it just for the sake of the story, it's not really needed. It just basically gives a lot of backstory into Carden and how he was neglected and fed on like cat's milk, and how he learned to, you know, become this hateful person. But a lot of it is already given away in the Queen of Nothing, and then it's just kind of building on that a little more. But again, I would not say it's needed. The last part does go back into the future when he is married to Jude, and again, I just don't think that's really needed. So if you're debating on whether to read this or not, based on its relevancy to the story as a whole, I would say no. But I did rate it 3 stars, so I did enjoy it still. Okay, and the last one I just finished reading yesterday was the Stolen Heir. So I think I rated this 4 stars as well. So basically we're following Urk now. So basically he's come back now, I believe he's 17. So on this he's the same age as Jude was. And pretty much there's a girl that's hinted at and brought in a little bit in, I believe, Queen of Nothing. She's brought in a little bit called Ren. I believe her real name is Suren. I'm not sure how you say that. But she is the queen of the Court of Teeth, but she's being tortured by her mother and father. And basically this is Urk uniting with her because they met when they was younger and going on this quest to bring back his father. So Maddox was exiled by Jude to the mortal world and basically tried to get in, and then he was like taken into custody and put in a cell by the Court of Teeth. And Lady Nor, who is Ren's mother, is trying to take over the whole kingdom, not just the Court of Teeth, the whole of Elfhame. And basically it's Urk and Ren's adventure trying to stop them. And I would say, if I'm going to give one thing I liked about this novel, is how good Urk was as a character. At first I was skeptical because, you know, throughout all the other novels he's a child and you see him as a child, and I was kind of skeptical on how I would now view him as this 18-year-old boy who's all grown up. Take him seriously, but I did not have any issues with that at all. I think the way he spoke with Ren and the way he just acted overall, he seemed so mature, and I really like that, you know, in the back of my mind I had like no reminders if he was the same Urk that was a child, you know, running around the castle. So the next one is The Prisoner's Throne, which I'm really excited to start reading. I was actually planning on reading the last Crescent City novel today, start reading that, but obviously I'm not doing that anymore because now I've got this one. So I'm really excited to start reading this. I've think one of the trickiest parts about writing novels is the planning stage. Through doing my creative writing degree and through just writing for 3 years now, I just wanted to share my experience with planning a novel, how to do it, how to flesh out your characters, and when to know when to stop. So the main thing I would say is to give yourself freedom to think. I was at an event, a networking event, with an author called Josie Bedford, I believe her name was, and she actually said this advice, and I took it on board and realised that I actually do use it myself. She said, and I agree basically, that a lot of ideas come to you when you don't expect them to come. I think if you sit and force an idea to come, oftentimes it won't. So I would say, yeah, sometimes when you wake up in the middle of the night and your mind is just going fast, like all these ideas are coming through, just to let them come through rather than trying to shut them off until the morning. Often enough, I've got like my best ideas, I would say, in the middle of the night or in the shower, in inconvenient places where I shouldn't be thinking of writing. Spending an hour or two sitting in the dark in the middle of the night, just writing down your ideas every 5 seconds, grabbing your phone, writing them down, is much better, I would say, than forcing them. Another important thing to note is that planning is different for everyone. It's important to know how your planning style works compared to other people. Try not to compare yourself. Like, again, these are what works for me, but it might not be what works for you, so just try not to compare yourself. In my creative writing class a few weeks ago, we was going through the gardener planning type and the architect planning type. So basically the architect planning type is someone who wants to fully flesh out the novel from start to finish, go into full detail about every single point, every single character, you know. And oftentimes, I would say I am an architect myself, but oftentimes, you know, you can fall into that loophole, as I said, of not knowing when to stop. Whereas a gardener is someone who prefers more just to let it flow. So, you know, as you would let your garden grow, let your story grow, you don't really go into too much planning, but also with that, at least for me, I think that creates plot holes. And a lot of the time, things that I want to show and I'm not showing, or I do show and then I forget about. So for me, architect works best, but again, it's whichever works best for you. Another great piece of advice is to use plot structures. The ones that you can find on websites online just by searching for them, I think work really well. It's sometimes controversial because people say that they could make, you know, your ideas unoriginal, but for me, I think they're there for a reason. I think they're there because they work, and I think a lot of popular novels that go on to be made into movies use these very well. But one important thing to note is that while you can use them, they don't have to be followed. Oftentimes they'll come with a set structure, but you can switch that around all you like, you know, add different points in. Often that's what I did with mine. I tried to follow it exactly and realised that I wasn't really enjoying the structure and how it was going step by step. So I did swap some points around, but I'm currently using it now. I'm using the hero's journey plot structure to structure my fantasy novel. Because I think just by seeing a plot structure and seeing, you know, something needs to lead up, like there's a part of it called the call where basically someone comes in and pushes them into this adventure, into this quest, whatever you like. And I think just seeing that helps, you know, create these ideas in your mind about who that could be, what they could be doing. And I think it's just a really useful resource to use. If it's there, you know, I'd say use it. Another piece of advice I'd give is that don't try to tailor your novels and your novels ideas to what other people will like. This is also advice I've got through networking events and with my lecturers at university a lot, that they say that oftentimes people will create books based on what is popular at the time and not so much what they are passionate about and more about what they think is going to sell. While this sometimes does work, I would say not to do this, because I think if you're not passionate about something, it's not going to show in your writing. and you're not going to be able to confidently speak about it as if you really love that project. So I would say maybe to steer away from that. I think sometimes it could work, you know, with putting certain tropes in it and things just to attract a better audience. But what I've learned through my research into publishing and working with my lecturers who are also published is that oftentimes if you get a publishing deal, it can take a few years, and that's like average time scale to get your novel published. So if you want to write something that is popular now, let's say it takes you a year, maybe more, to write it, then another 3 years to get it published, that thing is not going to be popular anymore. So I'd say it's just most important to stick with what you're comfortable with and what you enjoy. Another thing I've used religiously is Pinterest boards. I love Pinterest boards. I love scrolling through Pinterest just to get ideas. I think you can vary your Pinterest boards for everything. I have Pinterest boards for characters, for different villages, for clothing they wear, and I think it's just a really good basis to getting ideas. When I was writing my dystopian novel, I typed in dystopian aesthetic and a lot of things were coming up, and I was like, I could use that. You know, there was one picture of burnt playing cards, and that just created this idea for me when I was thinking of hobbies that they should do in this rebellion that they're in. And I thought that was a great idea to have these burnt playing cards. And again, like, that's how I fully fleshed out my characters. I think I have a Pinterest board for every single character with, you know, things they enjoy, their hobbies, specific things about their appearance. I think often enough you can find a name, but actually seeing the person is what kind of sparks the ability to flesh them out fully. Another resource I really enjoy using, and I've only just really recently started using it, is world building templates. Again, as I said, if it's on Google, you know, if it's very popular, it's usually for a good reason. So currently I'm using I think it's Reedsy, I will link it below, but the Reedsy world building template. And it basically just gets you thinking about all these questions that, you know, you need to know to fully flesh out your world, depending on if it's fantasy or if it's set in the real world, like my dystopian was set in Paris. I think it just gets you thinking about a lot of questions. Like often it says like, what currency do they use? What's the weather types? You know, what's the terrain like? What do they celebrate? All these sorts of questions. It gets you thinking about your location. And also an important thing to note is that you don't have to use them all. I think it's best to know your world better than your reader will. I wouldn't just go into things, you know, that you know you're going to put in your novel. I would go into full detail, show everything so you understand it. Because if you understand it fully, then you're going to explain it better, even if you're not using every single thing you work to understand. Building off the world building templates, I think another thing is character profile templates are also really well used. I have my own that I have created from a mix of, you know, a lot that I've used over the years and the questions that I think work well best with my characters. And I'll try and link that below if I can. But basically, you just want to ask yourself every question you can about your character. And again, like I said with the world building, you may not use them all, but it's just to make sure you know your character, which will also help with getting the voice, realising, you know, how they'll react in certain situations, and it can often drive your plot with making new changes that fit your character best. So just an example of some of the questions I have is like, what's the worst memory they have? What's the best memory they have? How are their family like? You go into detail about their appearance, you know, any quirks they have. And you're just really fully fleshing them out, because I think the worst thing to do is to aim for a fully rounded character and not quite hit it. And I think by creating these character profiles alongside with your Pinterest boards and everything about these characters really works well. And also something I haven't tried but I've heard a lot of people do is to create character voices. They write like a letter from the voice of their character, and they just write like a page of their character talking. And I want to try that out because I think that might be a really good idea. But yeah, I'd say for the basis of starting your character, Pinterest boards, character profiles work really well. And also just world building as a whole will, you know, decide what their worst memory is. For example, in my dystopian novel, her worst memory is of her mother getting sick from an illness that stems from the climate change in the world building that created this disease. So I would say take each one of these with a pinch of salt Like, they're not going to work for everyone, and often you might need more than this, less than this, but this is what works for me, and I would recommend them to everyone wanting to start writing their own novel.